Welcome to A Changed Life. This is a podcast about choosing differently, how you think, how you relate, and how you lead yourself. Here we focus on the inner shifts that create real momentum and open up what's possible next. Welcome back to the podcast. This is Ilyse, and I'm very happy that you're here. I'm going to start today with saying something that I'm not so sure that I've ever said this out loud, but I'm going to say it now. It's really not earth-shattering. It's just a realization that I have. And what it is I understand men. Not perfectly, not completely, not every little last thing, but after over 10 years now of sitting across from men in the betrayal space, in men's groups, in couples work, in one-on-one work, I've learned something about them that just doesn't get said enough. Men want to get it right. And that's the thing I want to lead with today, because everything else that I'm going to say builds on that. Almost every man I've worked with, when you get past the defense and the shame and the story that they're protecting, wants to be better, wants to do better, wants to actually become the man that the relationship deserves. They're not actually performing that most of the time. They really mean it. But I want to be honest about what wanting to get it right actually looks like when a man first walks in, because there are two versions of it, and they're not the same thing. Okay, so at the beginning, it's almost always the ego self that wants to get it right. The shame is loud. The ego is loud. And getting it right means not being the person who did this to anyone. It means being able to look at himself again. It means she sees him as someone who is trying, someone who is worthy. That's not nothing. That motivation is real, and that gets men in the door. But it is really fragile. But the moment she isn't responding to his efforts in the way he hoped, that motivation wobbles. When the ego is driving, her reaction becomes the fuel. And that is a dangerous place to be, and a dangerous place to build recovery from. What I've come to learn is the deeper desire, the one that doesn't need an audience and doesn't need her to validate it, that comes later. And it usually comes after a specific kind of reckoning where he stops asking, how do I look in this? And starts asking, who am I actually? And that is the shift. That is the moment the work gets real traction. This is when wanting to get it right stops being about ego and starts being about something much, much closer to the soul. I have watched that shift happen in men. It is one of the most significant things I literally have ever witnessed in this work. And everything I'm going to share today is in service of getting him there. And yet, even with that desire present, something keeps getting in the way. So today, I want to talk about what that something is, because what I've learned in 10 years is that it is actually not what most people think. So let me paint a picture for you. There has been a betrayal, something significant, the kind of thing that cracks a relationship, shatters its foundation, and in the immediate aftermath, everything swings in one direction. All the focus, all the care, all the energy goes to the person who is harmed and hurt. And that is right. That is necessary. That is what triage actually looks like. And I'm not arguing with triage. Triage is real. It is literally necessary. People in crisis need to be stabilized first. And it is not for him to decide how long triage actually lasts. But here's what I've watched where things go sideways again and again across the time frame of doing this work. That pendulum, it swings hard to one side. and it never, ever swings back. The man who caused that damage is essentially told in 100 different ways that his job is to be remorseful. His job is to learn how to express empathy. His job is to prove that he is becoming a different man or that he is a different man. His job is to make it up to her. His job is to hold her through what he caused. And those things are true. Those things are part of the work, but at some point, and nobody wants to say this out loud because it sounds like it's letting him off the hook, and it's not. But the pendulum has to come back to center. Because here's the thing that I know, and I need you to hear this regardless of which side of the betrayal that you're on. Because not knowing and not understanding his own needs is part of what created the damage in the first place. So I really want you to think about that. Him not knowing and him not understanding his own needs is part of what created the damage in the first place. And so if there is a system that is set up where the pendulum goes all the way over to the side of the one that was harmed, and it gets parked there, not during just through triage. I'm talking parked there for years and years and years. It is perpetuating the exact ecosystem, internal ecosystem that got him into the problem in the first place. So you've got to sit with that for a second. He didn't have the tools. He didn't have the language. He couldn't access what he actually needed inside the relationship. So he went and found it somewhere, somehow, someplace else, and he numbed it. Or he blew it up in ways that were so destructive and damaging and wrong. And I am not excusing that. I'm saying that if the recovery process doesn't address that, you're patching the roof without looking at what caused the leak. Keeping the pendulum all the way to one side doesn't just stall his growth, it perpetuates the exact dynamic that contributed to where you both ended up. So I'm saying it anyway because it's true and because you deserve a path that actually works. Here's something I need to say to the men listening. You can learn the language of this work very fast, and I know many of you have. You know the terms, you understand the concepts, you can explain attachment theory and nervous system dysregulation and the impact of betrayal on the brain. You can freaking teach it. And I want to tell you something about that. She can feel the difference between you knowing it and you living it every single time. There is no amount of vocabulary that creates a felt sense in your partner that you have actually changed. That felt sense only comes from one thing and one thing only, embodiment. And embodiment only comes from practicing living in the being state before you've actually arrived at the being state. So think about this. Before you became a husband, there was a moment, maybe before the ring or before the wedding, waiting for the wedding to happen, where something in you shifted. You started thinking differently. You started making decisions differently. Your identity began to reorganize around what it meant to be someone's partner, to be someone's husband. You weren't fully there yet, but you were living from that place. That wasn't willpower. That is identity in motion. So the same thing probably happened when you became a dad. Before the baby was even home, you started becoming a father. Something rewired. Your priorities, your instincts, the way you moved through the world. You didn't wait until you had 10 years of parenting experience to start showing up as a father. You stepped into the identity and let the living of it teach you. Same thing at work. That promotion that you work toward, at some point, before you got it, you were already carrying yourself like someone who got it. You elevated before the title was official because you already made the internal shift. That is what recovery that lands actually looks like. Not a man who can explain what he did wrong and the perfect clinical language, saying all the right things. Not a man who can explain what he did wrong in perfect clinical language. It looks like a man whose partner walks into a room and feels something different, whose presence has changed, whose patterns have changed, not because he's trying harder, but because he has genuinely become someone he wasn't before. And that is embodiment. And that is the only thing that reaches her. The work is not to get better at talking about change. The work is to become the change until it lives in your body, in your choices, in your instincts, in the way you show up at 9 p.m. on a random Tuesday when nobody is watching and nobody is keeping score. That is the version of you she's waiting for. And that's the version of you that you actually want to be. Whew. Okay, so you could, I don't know if you feel it, but I definitely feel it in my body. I'm having like a true somatic experience delivering this podcast episode. I feel this so deeply. I want to pause here and I want to speak directly to the woman or the person who was betrayed. Because if I'm going to talk about what men need, I need to do it in a way that doesn't leave you feeling unseen or like your pain just got moved to the back of the room. I promise you it didn't. What happened to you, to us, matters. The deception, the breach of trust, the way it rewired how you see yourself in the world and in your relationship and maybe even your sense of reality, that is real and it is significant and it deserves to be taken really seriously. And I am not asking you to minimize that or rush past that or to perform some form of forgiveness that you don't even feel yet or maybe ever. But what I'm asking you to consider is this. The person who hurt you is not the sum total of what they did. Hurt people hurt people. I'm sure you've heard that before, and that is not an excuse, and it was never meant to be one. It is an explanation about how human beings who don't have the tools, who don't know how to access what they need, who haven't done the work of knowing themselves, end up causing horrific damage that can feel incomprehensible to the people closest to them. The behavior was wrong. The events, they were real. And whatever went on, whether it was one moment or something that went on for years and years and years and decades, that is not who your partner is in totality. It is what they did when they were operating from their most broken, most unskilled, most disconnected place. And that distinction matters, not for his sake alone, but for yours too. Because if he is irredeemable in your eyes, there is no recovery. There is only an ending. And what I mean by that is that if he is irredeemable in your eyes, there is no relational recovery. That is the end. And if you're choosing to stay and do this work, then at some point you have to be willing to hold both things at once. What he did and who he is capable of becoming. And that is not weakness. That is the hardest kind of courage there is. And here's what I want you to know. All these years working with men and with couples who are trying to heal, the ones who make it are not the ones who pretend the harm didn't happen. They're the ones who refuse to let it be the only thing about their relationship. So yeah, your pain counts. Yes, your healing matters. And what I'm about to share is not designed to pull focus away from you. It's not. It's designed to give him what he needs to show up for you. Because a man who is demoralized, who's been told implicitly or explicitly that he has no right to have any needs at all, that he must earn his way back to being human in this relationship, and that he's sequestered in the corner until further notice, that man cannot heal. And a man who cannot heal cannot give you what you actually came here for. You both deserve a real recovery, not a performance of one. So I'm going to give you the real list, not theory, but what I've actually observed sitting across from men for all these years. And these are the top 5 overarching, really important things that I want to leave you with today. So number 1, they're in it for the relationship, but they need to be in it for themselves. So I see this over and over. A man comes into this work because his relationship is on the line. Everything's on the line, and that is the motivator. And it's not a bad motivator. It's real and it's urgent. But if the only reason he's doing the work is to save the relationship, what happens when the relationship stabilizes? The work stops, because the reason he was doing it is no longer screaming at him. The men I've watched make the most significant and lasting changes are the one who crossed over the line at some point where it became about them, who they are, who they want to be, what kind of man they actually want to look in the mirror and see. That shift from doing the work for her to doing the work for himself is the difference between a temporary season of effort and actual, lasting, sustainable transformation. Oftentimes, we just had this conversation in my men's group. It is the partner that was hurt, that was devastated. It is that partner that goes on the hunt and takes the lead to find the books and the podcasts and the groups and the intensives and the workshops and the coaching and all of the things. And on some level, it actually makes sense that it's that way. However, just like I just described, at some point, it has to become about him. And when that happens, that is when the recovery and the healing happens and sticks. So number 2, they struggle to acknowledge their own growth. And this one hurts my heart a bit. A man will do months of hard, genuine work, real change, visible change. And someone will ask him how he's doing, and he'll minimize it. I got a long way to go. Yeah, I'm working on it. I still got a lot to do. He doesn't know how to receive the acknowledgement of his own progress without feeling like it lets him off the hook for what happened. So he keeps his head down. And the people around him, his partner especially, don't know if he sees how far he's come. That silence creates its own damage. Acknowledging progress is not the same as declaring yourself healed. It's not. You can say, I've changed in these specific ways, or I notice a shift in these specific areas, without ever erasing accountability. In fact, naming your growth is part of how you hold it. Again, I'm going to mention my men's group because recently we did an exercise about rigorous honesty. And the men rated themselves from 1 to 5 on a whole host of areas. And what was interesting when they were reporting their findings and doing this exercise was, if I was answering this 6 months ago or a year ago or 2 years ago, I would answer this very differently. And they all said that. And I said, okay, we got to pause here, because that is you recognizing your growth. And if you were able to go from where you were 2 years ago to where you were a year ago to where you were 6 months ago, it is evidence. There is proof that you are changing. And even though it may feel like this is a long road or a lifetime road, it gives you some hope and a direction on the compass of where you're going, because you can see where you came from. It's really, really important. Number 3, they want to be understood without appearing defensive. Almost every man I've ever worked with carries this exact tension. He wants to explain. He wants her to understand what was actually happening inside of him, but not as an excuse, but because he wants to be known. He wants his experience to count. But every time he opens his mouth and explains, it lands as a defense, as deflection, as a man that's just not getting it. And so he learns to stay quiet. And the quiet looks like he doesn't care. And she's right back to feeling alone again. That silence is one of the most costly patterns I see in betrayal recovery. Both people are suffering inside of it, and neither one knows how to break it. Number 4, they want to be believed in. He wants to know you're not just waiting for him to blow it again, that you can hold both things at the same time, what happened and who he's trying to become. That belief doesn't mean that you're naive. It means you're invested in his becoming, and that matters to him more than most men will ever say out loud. And number 5, they want a place inside a relationship where their needs are safe. And this is truly the heart of it, because unmet needs that have no healthy home don't disappear. They find another way out. And what I watch men build in real recovery is the ability to say what they need, to ask for what they need, and to have a partner who can meet some of those needs without it feeling like a crisis. That is the relationship you're both building toward. That is what healthy actually looks like. So I want to say something that I think reframes the entire conversation about men and why they do the things they do. Most men who have caused harm in a relationship are not morally bankrupt. They have a skill deficit. That is a completely different problem with a completely different solution. And yet so much of what passes for recovery treats these two things the same way. More remorse, more accountability, more sitting in the weight of what happened. And when the actual problem is a skill deficit, that approach gets you nowhere. You cannot shame someone into developing a capacity they've never built. So here's what I mean. Most men were never taught how to identify what they were feeling in real time. They were not taught how to name an emotional need and bring it into a conversation without either shutting down or escalating, the two extremes. They were not taught how to regulate when things got hard instead of numbing, deflecting, defending, or disappearing into whatever gave them relief. These are skills, learnable, practicable, repeatable skills, and the absence of them is part of what created the conditions for the damage in the first place. So when I say men need tools, I'm not talking about a tip sheet. I'm talking about building a skill set that didn't exist before. Communication skills, connection skills, emotional regulation skills, repair skills. So when things go sideways in real time, instead of 3 days later when everyone has already shut down and retreated, they can show up and deal with it and be with it and walk with it and hold it. This gives him ways of knowing himself well enough that he stops being blindsided by his own reactions. Men do really well with tools and processes. And through all these years of watching what actually creates movement versus what leaves people spinning, give a man a framework he can practice and repeat, and it begins to become his brain's default. That new pathway gets stronger every time he uses it. The old one starts to lose its grip, and that is not a metaphor. That is literally how the brain rewires. The goal is not a man who can explain what went wrong. The goal is a man whose nervous system, whose instincts, whose go-to responses have actually changed. That only happens through practice. It only happens through repetition, through skills becoming so familiar that they stop feeling like skills and start feeling like just who he is. That is the recovery that holds. Now, I want to spend a minute on this because it affects everything. If you're doing this work, whether you are the one who was betrayed or the one who caused the betrayal or the couple trying to find a path forward, the support you choose matters enormously. Not just whether someone is trained, whether they are trained for this. And here's what I see more than I'd like. A therapist begins working with one partner or a coach who hasn't been trained in couples work, and over time, they form a picture of the other person in the relationship. A picture built entirely from one side of the story, and they start making recommendations. They start offering perspective, sometimes even making judgments about someone they never met, someone who has never had a voice in the room. And I've watched this cause enormous damage. A therapist who helped one partner frame the other as irredeemable. A coach who validated a client's fury so completely that there was no longer any room for the relationship to be seen clearly anymore. The client leaves those sessions feeling really understood, but they're being understood inside a story that only has one narrator. Now listen, I'm not here to bash anybody. Truly, I'm not. Therapists do really vital work, and some of them are extraordinary. But there's something that therapists are ethically and structurally unable to do. They cannot work with both partners and the couple. That is a dual relationship, and it violates the boundaries of that profession for good reason. What it means practically is that if both partners are working with a different therapist and the couple isn't being seen together by someone who knows them both, you have two people in separate rooms building separate cases, and it's not the same as healing a relationship. So I can tell you my best work, the work that has produced the most significant and lasting results, has always involved a working relationship with each partner individually and the couple as a unit. When I know both people, when I can hold the full picture, when neither of them is reduced to a character in the other one's story, this is where real movement happens. And I think also why I have long struggled with the industry standard 3 to 5 years for recovery is because I've seen it much faster. And I truly believe the reason why is because of this setup of having one person that the couple trusts hold them and the relationship together. So if you're looking for support, look for someone who is trained. Look for someone who has experience in this specific space. And look for someone who is forward approaching, because you can spend years and years and years with someone who is incredibly skilled at helping you understand the past and still be no closer to the life that you actually want. The goal is not to be the most insightful person in the pain. The goal is a changed life. So I started this podcast today by saying that almost every man I've worked with wants to get it right. So I want to close by saying something to both of you. To him, the work you're doing matters. The fact that you are here, that you're trying to understand yourself, that you're fighting for something even when it's uncomfortable and humbling and slow, that counts. Don't let the pendulum keep you so focused on her healing that you forget you are healing too. Your needs are not a threat to her recovery. Unaddressed, they're actually part of what's at risk. Learn your tools. Know yourself. Become the man not for the relationship but for yourself, and trust that that man who shows up for himself shows up better for everyone. And to her, the part of him that wants to be believed in, that is not manipulation. That is a man trying to find his footing. You can hold him accountable and believe in who he is becoming. Those two things are not in conflict. And if he has a place inside this relationship with you where his needs are safe, where he doesn't have to sneak them or numb them or find them somewhere else, that is not letting him off the hook. That is building something that can actually last. A changed life is available for both of you. It usually takes longer than either of you thought, but not as long as the industry standard says. And it almost always requires the right support. So as always, if this episode landed for you, you're ready to do this kind of work, here's how we can do it together. I have a men's group. There is one spot open, and I'm opening up a wait list for the next men's group. We meet on Thursdays. It's possible that by the time you hear this episode, the spot is filled, but you can get on the wait list. I keep my group small. I teach them myself, and it is skills and tools heavy, I would say. There's a lot of coaching. And if that is what you're looking for, or if that there's a gap in what you're getting, reach out and let's have a conversation. I also created Embody Him, and during this episode, I mentioned embodiment quite a bit. That program is 12 video modules built specifically for men who want to do this work at their own pace or inside of a group container. It is available both self-paced and group. This is the program that gives you the tools, the framework, and the process to actually know yourself and grow from the inside out. And of course, I work with men one-on-one as well as with couples who are doing this together. Everything is in the show notes, or you can visit my website, ilysecraft.com. If you are the man that I'm speaking to, I want to really encourage you to share this with your partner. I get it. It's going to feel risky, most likely. It's going to feel super vulnerable, and it's going to take a lot of courage to do. I want to challenge you to do it anyway. And if you are the woman that I was speaking to in this episode, then I want to encourage you to do the same thing. I want to encourage you to share this with your partner. Just know this. I believe deeply in healing. I believe deeply that you and him and the two of you are more than what's happened to you. I believe in creating a changed life and creating a changed relationship deeply. Thanks. If something in today's episode resonated with you, you'll find a link in the show notes to book a free consultation call. Or you can visit ilyse to explore my programs and free resources. Nothing changes until you do. And when you do, everything does. This is a changed life. Not all at once, but for good.